Her brothers celebrated as they took everything: the ranch, the house, the money, every last dollar. All Emily was left with was an old rusted water tower standing alone in the middle of the desert. They laughed at her, called it worthless junk, but what they didn't know was that their father had hidden a secret beneath that tower for over 40 years. And when Emily finally uncovered what was buried beneath the dry desert soil, the same brothers who threw her away would do anything to get it back. But by then, it was already too late. Emily Carter stood alone beside the rusted water tower as the Arizona sun burned across the horizon. The wind carried dust through the dry fields that had once belonged to her family. Just 3 months earlier, she had buried her father. Now she was watching everything he had built disappear piece by piece. Her 2 older brothers had inherited the ranch house, the livestock, the equipment, and nearly all the land. She received only one thing: an abandoned water tower sitting on a small patch of worthless desert ground. Everyone in town thought it was a mistake. Her brothers certainly did. They laughed when the lawyer read the will. They even offered to buy the tower from her for $1 as a joke. Emily refused. She couldn't explain why, but something about her father's final decision didn't feel random. He had always been careful, always deliberate. During her childhood, she remembered seeing him walk to the tower alone every week. No matter how busy he was, no matter how hot the day became, he always climbed those old metal steps and stayed there for several minutes before returning in silence. Whenever she asked what he was doing, he would simply smile and change the subject. Now, with debts piling up and foreclosure notices arriving in the mail, Emily faced an impossible choice: sell the tower and leave the land forever, or discover why her father had protected it until his very last day. The answer was waiting, hidden somewhere above the desert floor. For several days, Emily tried to ignore the questions filling her mind. She focused on survival instead. Every morning began before sunrise. She worked temporary jobs in a nearby town, cleaned motel rooms, stocked shelves at a grocery store, and returned to the property exhausted long after dark. Yet every evening, her eyes drifted toward the silhouette of the water tower standing against the fading sky. Something about it refused to let her go. One afternoon, after receiving another warning from the bank, Emily decided she had nothing left to lose. She gathered a toolbox, a flashlight, and a ladder. If her father had left her only this tower, she would inspect every inch of it. The structure was older than she remembered. Rust covered the support beams. Several bolts had nearly corroded through. Birds nested beneath the reservoir tank. As she cleaned decades of dirt and debris from the lower supports, her scraper struck metal. Clang. The sound was different. Emily knelt and brushed away layers of dust. A small steel plate emerged from the rusted surface. It looked intentionally hidden. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she wiped the plate clean. There were only 7 words engraved into the metal. The answer waits above the final step. She froze. The handwriting wasn't printed. It was engraved by hand, and she recognized it immediately. It was her father's. The same uneven lettering he used when marking tools, equipment, and storage boxes around the ranch. Emily stared at the message for several seconds. What answer? And why had he hidden it? The next morning, before the desert heat became unbearable, she began climbing the tower. The metal staircase groaned beneath her weight. Each step seemed older than the last. The higher she climbed, the stronger the wind became. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Halfway up, doubt crept into her mind. Maybe her father had left the message years ago as some harmless joke. Maybe there was nothing to find. Maybe she was chasing a fantasy because reality had become too painful. But she kept climbing. Finally, she reached the last step. The platform surrounding the water tank was empty. At first glance, there was nothing unusual. No box, no documents, no hidden compartment, just rusted metal and decades of desert weather. Disappointment washed over her. Then she noticed something. One section of the platform floor looked slightly different from the rest. The metal wasn't as weathered. Someone had replaced it. Emily knelt and examined the surface. A tiny seam ran along the edge. A hatch. Her heart pounded. Using a screwdriver, she pried the panel upward. Inside was a narrow compartment sealed from the elements, and resting within it was a weathered leather tube. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a folded map. Nothing else. No explanation, no letter, no instructions, just a hand-drawn map of the property. At the center was a red circle positioned directly beneath the tower. Beside it was a single handwritten date, 1984. Emily stared at the number. Why 1984? What had happened that year? The answer didn't come immediately. But over the following week, she began digging through county records, newspaper archives, and old documents stored in the courthouse basement. What she found only deepened the mystery. In 1984, a mining corporation had attempted to purchase thousands of acres across the region. Most landowners accepted. Her father refused. Not once, not twice, but 7 separate offers, each larger than the last. The final offer was so large that neighbors still talked about it decades later. Everyone believed he had made the worst financial decision of his life. Yet, according to the records, the company had shown unusual interest in one specific area. The exact location marked on the map, the land beneath the water tower. And suddenly, Emily realized something chilling. Her father hadn't been protecting an old tower. He had been protecting whatever was hidden underneath it. The question was no longer whether there was a secret. The question was why powerful people had wanted it so badly, and what they knew that nobody else did. The deeper Emily investigated, the stranger the story became. At the county archives, she spent days sorting through yellowed documents, property surveys, and decades-old newspaper clippings. Most of the records were ordinary: land transfers, tax payments, agricultural reports, but occasionally a detail appeared that didn't fit. A missing survey, a redacted geological report, several property transactions connected to shell companies that no longer existed. Someone had gone to considerable effort to erase parts of the area's history. One afternoon, an elderly clerk noticed the stack of documents spread across her desk. "You've been looking at that property for days," he said quietly. Emily nodded. The man hesitated. Then he leaned closer. "I remember your father." That immediately caught her attention. The clerk explained that nearly 40 years earlier, a group of businessmen had arrived from out of state. They weren't interested in farming. They weren't interested in cattle. They wanted one specific parcel of land, the same parcel beneath the tower. When Emily asked why, the clerk simply shook his head. Nobody ever knew, but then he added something unexpected. They weren't the first. According to local stories, interest in that section of land stretched back much further than 1984. Long before her father owned the ranch, long before the tower was even built. The revelation sent Emily searching even deeper. Eventually, She traced ownership records back nearly a century, and there she found a name that appeared repeatedly: a rancher named Thomas Whitaker, the original owner of the property, a man who had become mysteriously wealthy during the Great Depression while neighboring farms collapsed around him. Newspaper articles described him as secretive, private, obsessed with protecting a certain section of his land, the exact same section. As Emily continued reading, another detail emerged. Whitaker had personally funded construction of the water tower in the early 1940s. At the time, it made little sense. The ranch already had adequate water storage elsewhere. Many locals questioned why he built a second tower in such an isolated location. No explanation was ever recorded. The tower's true purpose remained a mystery. Until Emily discovered something else. Hidden inside an old newspaper article was a brief mention of a geological survey conducted during World War II. The survey team spent several weeks on Whitaker's ranch. Then the records abruptly ended. No findings, no final report, nothing. It was as though the results had vanished. The more Emily learned, the more convinced she became that generations of owners had been guarding the same secret. Whitaker, then her father, and now her. But why? One evening, while reviewing old maps spread across her trailer table, she noticed a small symbol near the tower. A marking she had overlooked before. It wasn't on modern surveys, only on the oldest maps. A circle surrounded by 3 lines. Curious, she showed the symbol to a retired geologist living nearby. The man's reaction startled her. His expression changed immediately. He recognized it. Decades ago, he explained, similar symbols were occasionally used by survey teams to identify underground water formations. Not ordinary wells, massive aquifers, natural reservoirs capable of holding unimaginable quantities of water. Emily felt her pulse accelerate. Could it really be that simple? Could the secret beneath the tower be water? The geologist wasn't sure. The symbol alone wasn't proof, but it was enough to justify further investigation. The next week, Emily spent nearly all of her remaining savings hiring a professional surveying company. It was a terrifying gamble. If they found nothing, she would lose the last of her money. If they found something, everything could change. The testing began early on a windy Tuesday morning. Large equipment arrived before sunrise. Sensors were placed across the property. Measurements were taken. Data was collected. Hours passed, then days. Finally, the lead geologist requested a private meeting. His face revealed nothing. Emily sat across from him inside a temporary field office, her stomach twisted into knots. The man studied the reports one final time before speaking. Then he looked directly at her. "Ms. Carter," he said carefully, "in 27 years of doing this work," he paused, "I've never seen readings like these." And at that moment, Emily realized her father's greatest secret was finally about to be uncovered. The lead geologist slowly turned the monitor toward Emily. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. Colored layers stretched beneath the property like an underground ocean frozen in time. Then the geologist pointed to a massive blue formation deep beneath the tower. "This," he said quietly, "this is water." Emily nodded. She had expected that much. But the man wasn't finished. "No," he continued, "you don't understand." He zoomed out. The image expanded. The formation kept growing, and growing, and growing. Emily stared in disbelief. The underground reservoir extended far beyond her property lines, far beyond neighboring ranches. It stretched for miles beneath the desert. The geologist leaned back in his chair. This may be one of the largest untouched freshwater reserves in the entire region. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. Everything around her seemed to disappear. The debts, the foreclosure notices, the humiliation, the years of struggle, all of it faded beneath the weight of what she was hearing. But the greatest surprise came next. The geologist opened another file, an old survey dated 1984. Emily immediately recognized the year from her father's map. "Where did you get this?" she asked. The man smiled. It wasn't easy. The document had been archived under a federal environmental review project and had remained buried inside government records for decades. The survey confirmed everything. Scientists had discovered the aquifer more than 40 years earlier. The mining company that approached her father had known about it. The businessmen who kept visiting the ranch had known about it. Everyone wanted control of the water, not the land, not the cattle, the water. Suddenly, every piece of the puzzle fell into place. The repeated offers, the pressure campaigns, the secrecy, the mysterious interest in a worthless water tower. The tower had never been the asset, it had been the marker, a silent monument built directly above one of the most valuable natural resources in the entire desert. Emily sat in stunned silence. Then she noticed something else inside the report. A handwritten note attached to the final page. Not from the scientist, from her father. The geologist handed her the photocopy. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her hands trembled as she read. "If you're reading this, then the secret finally found its way to you." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "Many people offered me money, more money than our family had ever seen. They wanted me to sell quickly before anyone understood what rested beneath this land." Emily swallowed hard. But water is different from gold, different from oil. Once it's gone, it's gone. And someday, this desert will need it more than I need a fortune. Her vision blurred. "If I leave this to you, it's because I trust your heart more than your ambition." The final sentence nearly broke her. "Protect it until you understand why." Emily lowered the paper. For years she had wondered whether her father loved her less, whether he had forgotten her, whether leaving her a rusted water tower was some cruel mistake. Now she finally understood. The tower wasn't what he left behind. The responsibility was. Word of the discovery spread faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, investors arrived, law firms arrived, developers arrived, government agencies arrived. The value of the land exploded overnight. And then came the people Emily expected, her brothers. The same brothers who laughed when the will was read, the same brothers who called the tower worthless. Now they demanded meetings. They hired attorneys. They claimed their father had been manipulated. They argued he never understood the true value of the property. One lawsuit became 2, then 3. Months of legal battles followed, but every document told the same story. The tower, the surrounding land, the mineral rights, the water rights, everything belonged to Emily, exactly as their father intended. The courts upheld the will. Every challenge failed. For the first time, her brothers realized the truth. Their father had known all along, and he had chosen Emily, not because she was his favorite, but because she was the only one who would protect what mattered most. The old water tower that everyone mocked had become one of the most valuable structures in the entire county. Yet, standing beneath it one evening, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Emily realized something unexpected. The water wasn't the true inheritance, the trust was, and that changed everything. The lawsuits eventually ended. The investors stopped calling every day. The reporters moved on to newer stories. But Emily's life would never be the same again. Within 3 years, the value of the water rights transformed her from a woman struggling to survive into one of the most influential landowners in the region. Yet, unlike many people who suddenly find wealth, she never forgot the months she spent sleeping in a trailer beside the tower. She never forgot the fear, the uncertainty, the loneliness. Most importantly, she never forgot the lesson her father had spent a lifetime trying to teach. Instead of selling everything to the highest bidder, Emily chose a different path. She created long-term agreements that protected the aquifer from overuse. She worked with local communities suffering from recurring droughts. She funded conservation projects throughout the county. She restored portions of the family ranch that had been sold after her father's death, and she established scholarships for young people pursuing environmental science and water management. Many investors thought she was making a mistake. Some claimed she could have become 10 times richer by exploiting the resource more aggressively. But every time she looked at the old tower, she remembered her father's note. Protect it until you understand why. Now she understood. The water was never meant to make one person wealthy. It was meant to help thousands. Years later, Emily finally received an unexpected visitor, one of her brothers, the older of the two. Time had changed him. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had faded. His hair was gray. His shoulders carried the weight of regret. They sat together beneath the shadow of the tower as the desert wind drifted across the property. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I hated you for a long time." Emily looked at him. There was no anger left in his voice, only honesty. "I thought Dad chose you because he loved you more." Emily remained quiet. Her brother stared at the tower. Then he laughed softly. "It's funny." "What is?" she asked. "We spent our whole lives chasing what Dad owned." He shook his head. "And you spent your life protecting what Dad loved." Neither spoke again for a while. The sun slowly descended toward the horizon. For the first time since their father's death, there was peace between them. Not because the past had been erased, but because the truth had finally replaced the resentment. As the years passed, the tower became something of a local landmark. School groups visited. Researchers studied the aquifer. Travelers stopped to photograph the structure standing alone against the endless Arizona sky. Most saw only an aging water tower, a relic from another era. But those who knew the story saw something else. They saw a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that value is not always visible, that the things people laugh at today may become the very things they envy tomorrow. One autumn evening, nearly 20 years after climbing the tower for the first time, Emily returned to the top platform. The metal had been restored, the structure reinforced, yet much of it remained unchanged. The same desert stretched toward the horizon. The same winds moved across the dry landscape. The same silence surrounded the tower. She opened the compartment where she had discovered the map decades earlier. Inside rested the original note from her father, carefully preserved, carefully protected. She read the final sentence one more time. "Protect it until you understand why." Then she smiled because now she finally understood something even deeper. Her father had never been testing her ability to find a secret. He had been testing her character. Anyone could inherit money. Anyone could inherit land. But very few people could be trusted with responsibility. That was the true treasure hidden beneath the tower. Not the water, not the wealth, not the millions of dollars. The trust. The belief that one person would choose stewardship over greed when the moment finally arrived. As darkness settled across the desert, Emily closed the compartment and looked out across the land one last time. The tower still stood, the water still flowed, and her father's legacy remained exactly where he had always intended. Safe, protected, and finally understood. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what someone leaves in your hands, it's what they leave in your heart. And sometimes the thing everyone else calls worthless becomes the very thing that changes your life forever.